Okay. All right. Good morning. Um, we are going to have another fun session on GAR contracts today. We are going to talk about the less fun parts of a contract negotiation. Maybe not the totally less fun parts, but a little bit interesting in that we have to deal with counteroffers, which I think is an important piece. And then the ugly terminations, and then the more positive reinstatements. So we'll start positive, go negative, and end positive. So let's get into it. Everybody see my screen okay? Excellent. All right. So first thing, counteroffer form. I love, 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 love the counteroffer form. I absolutely cannot handle when agents go old school and strike stuff and mark up existing offers and those sorts of things because it's just messy. But the counteroffer can be not used correctly. So let's look closely at what it says. Obviously, you're making it at a certain time and date. You are referring it to the purchase and sale agreement that's dated whatever that offer date was. And then, of course, for the property that's there. When you submit this counter offer, all previous counter offers are rejected. Okay, that's important to know. So you can't go back. Like this is the scenario. Buyer sends a counteroffer, or seller sends a counteroffer, then buyer sends another counteroffer, and seller decides they should accept or buyer decides they should accept the one the seller sent. Sorry, can't do that because that one's been rejected. As soon as the buyer sent another counteroffer, that seller's counter was rejected and it's over. Okay. So that's important. See, I didn't turn off my actual cell phone. And so that's important to know. A relationship between this offer and the original offer. Pretty straightforward. This is incorporated into that. The whole thing is blended together. However, this is important. Anything that you write on this one that contradicts uh, anything in the original offer controls. Okay, and we'll get to that in a second. The effect of accepting this offer. When this counteroffer is signed and delivered, the original offer as modified constitutes a legally binding agreement. So, since the original offer includes all the exhibits and everything, when you sign this, you only need to sign this in order to create a legally binding contract. Now, let's jump to the last week we talked about finance contingencies, one of which was the FHA. Anybody know what happens when you do a counteroffer and you're doing an FHA loan? Most lenders, all lenders, I believe, are going to want your clients to sign, they're going to want everybody's signature on that FHA exhibit. Okay. So it is not unheard of to have to sign some of the original things. The reality is that you don't technically have to in order to make them valid, but obviously with FHA and VA lending guidelines and things, they like to have that original document signed as well. So know that that might happen. Then this is my least favorite paragraph in the entire thing is the if either party wants to request a conformed or clean copy of the contract, meaning blending it all together into one as opposed to having a counter and a contract separate, you have to do that. You have to provide it. You should make sure that you include that special stipulation, which is why it's called out there, the conformed copy agreement, which clearly states anything I screw up in this clean copy doesn't count. It's effectively what that special stipulation says. And so to me, that basically says, why would you bother doing a clean copy? Like, unless you're dealing with, somebody from the 80s that's faxing you contracts and you can't read things and it's all horrible, I don't see a reason to do that. So basic things. All right. Counteroffer form, this is where the meat is. Um, terms and conditions, literally boxes from the first page of the purchase and sale agreement, right? All normal things. We can change the purchase price, we can change the closing cost, possession, closing, holder of the earnest money, closing law firms, earnest money, inspection and due diligence, time limits of this counteroffer. All those things are just fill in the blank. And every time you counter, you should fill in every one of those blanks, right? Yeah, I got two no's, I got a yes, and I got I'm not really sure from Ryan. So the answer to that is no. You should not fill in all the blanks because the risk is if you fill in the blank and you typo something, remember that paragraph on the previous page, this modifies the original offer. Anything you write on this drives. So if you make the mistake of typing something in here funky, which, happens, it's going to change the original offer terms. So you should just fill in the things you want to change. I think the other reason for that is because it makes it easier for the other party to know what things you're countering, right? Because if you fill out everything, they've got to go, oh, wait, did I ask for 2,500 or 3,000 in closing costs? I don't remember. And now this says 2,500 and I don't remember. So I got to go back and look. Or, is the closing date different than what I had asked for? Is that, and so you got to double check everything. If you just fill in the things that you want to change, it just makes it easier on everybody and there's a lot less risk to it. The only box you have to fill out on here is, of course, the time limit of this counteroffer. Any questions about that?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So you don't want to put like the NA in the blanks you're not using?
You can, but at the top there it says that you can, it says either the section's not filled in, so left blank, or marked NC for no change, are not part of the agreement. So you can do either. I'm 100% in support of people putting NC in the blocks, just like you would, NAs in the main contract for things that are not applicable. Because, again, it makes sure that everybody knows that you didn't miss something, that you actually purposely filled it in. But you don't have to just the way this contract is written. So it's up to you. Most people I don't see doing that. Most people are just filling in, a lot of people just fill in the whole thing, which again, I think is causes an issue of clarity, and potentially modify something you don't mean to. So that's an important part. Of course, then there's the other modifications to the original offer where you can write anything you want. We had one the other day that was some subsection of some exhibit that they wanted to change something in it, and they're like, how do I do that? And I said, well, you just reference it here in F. You say, okay, exhibit A, paragraph 2B will say this, right? And if you can make it clear like that, then you can make it clear. Same thing with special stipulations, which is why it's important and when you're writing special stipulations to number them so that you can reference and you say special stipulation number 3 is hereby removed, or special stipulation number 3 is hereby modified to say. All of those things are things that you can do here, and you can modify literally any part of the contract. Obviously, regular signatures happen here, and then there's a binding agreement at the bottom to be used once it is binding. Any questions about the counter?
Hey, Brett, would you mind, because it does get confusing on a counter offer, the time limit, because if there's not an original or there's not a time limit on the original offer, and then you put one in, maybe you can just explain how all of that works, or if it's
So time limits are cumulative. So if you think about it this way, my original offer, let's say there was no time limit in your example, there's no time limit on my original offer. If the other party counters my original offer and puts a time limit in, now this counter dies if that time limit goes by, right? If I counter back the other way, then Now the new time limit on the new counter is the one that drives. Now, as a question, can I go back and sign that original offer if there was no time limit on it, even though I've done counter offers? This is a bonus points question. I got some skepticism from Kimberly. Ryan, give me a yes or no. Maybe not sure. So here's the reality. The reality is that if that original purchase and sale agreement offer doesn't have a time limit on it, it is open forever and ever, amen. Doing a counter doesn't negate. Go back to the language here. The previous counter offers are considered. Oh no, I'm sorry. It says right here. This language changes. This is why it's important we pay attention to it. The original offer and all previous counteroffers are no longer available for acceptance. So Kimberly is correct. You cannot sign that original offer anymore, even if it didn't have a deadline on it. Okay, so you got to pay attention to those deadlines, as we talked about with the original offer. All right, let's talk about a couple of bonus forms that people don't use very often, but are related to this. This is the notice to reject offer or counteroffer. Why would you ever use this?
If there's multiple offers.
If there's multiple offers, this is a really nice way to provide documentation to a bunch of buyer's agents that everybody submitted their thing. Here's the thing. Now, what's weird about this, there is this little box here underneath this that you can write whatever you want. I don't recommend writing anything there necessarily. But I would, I do think that it's nice to go ahead and provide these. It's pretty easy to, fill them out, sign them, and send them over. Because then that just gives clarity that that offer's been rejected and there's no question about whether it's still open or not. So again, you're just having the signature of the party giving notice, which there's a couple spots. So if your seller is the one doing the rejecting, then you can do that and go from there. In a buyer situation, you might reject a counteroffer from the seller, just so that it's no longer available, right? Like you don't want them to be able to, you don't want it to be open anymore, and so you could reject it. I think multiple offers is more viable use of this. Now, if clients are doing multiple offers, if you're involved in a multiple offer and you're not getting this form, you can use this form. And this form says, I want to get confirmation of the presentation of the offer or counteroffer. So if you're working with an agent that is questionable, then you can work on and get that here. Clearly calls out the rules, then the code of ethics as to why you're allowed to do this. And then I believe on the next page, you have the signature of the broker's affiliated licensee that's requesting it. And then you get the signature of the responding person that the responding broker of it being presented. Now, you might ask, well, this is just the agent saying that they presented the offer. Yes, that is true. Now, if you were to find out that this agent signed this and said that they presented this offer and you find out that they didn't, what has just happened? They violated the law and they violated the code of ethics. So you can absolutely call them up, file a grievance with GREC. You can file with the board and knock them from that perspective. So definitely things you can do there. All right, probably relatively rarely used form. Let's keep moving. Let's talk about terminations. We're to the bad part when contracts fall apart. I'm going to start with the mutual termination. Why do I start with the mutual termination? Somebody? Robin?
All parties agree rather than just unilateral.
All parties agree rather than unilateral. And so by this mutual termination happening, you get to say all the different stuff, whether the brokers are getting paid anything, the disbursement of the earnest money, and everybody signs it. And once everybody signs it, can anybody argue about whether it's valid or not? No, right? And you don't have to say why you're terminating because it doesn't matter. If everybody agrees, then you're terminated. You're done, right? Like that's just the way it is. So I believe you should always do a mutual first if you can, if everybody's in agreement that you're terminating. Now, most of the time in a contract situation, I've got my client, I say I'm a buyer's agent. My buyer's agent wants to terminate because of due diligence or whatever, financing, whatever the reasons are. And I need to make sure that happens in a timely manner. In other words, protect the earnest money, right? And so that's where your unilateral comes in. That if you want to use your unilateral during a valid termination right, then this is where you terminate. Now, this is the top half of the form, and this is the bottom half of the form. They are completely two separate forms. When I submit this unilateral notice to terminate, if I write down here that the buyer's right to terminate during the due diligence as set forth in the agreement, but due diligence ended 3 days ago, what happens? Is the contract terminated? Yes, because I've given notice to terminate. Now, my reasoning for terminating or my what I'm trying to leverage to terminate and get my earnest money is wrong, but my notice to terminate is still a termination of the contract. The contract is terminated. Okay? So you have to understand you can't threaten with these things. Once you sign it and send it over, it's over. Contract is dead. Now, the next page is whether or not you're going to get your earnest money back. Now, if you think you terminate during due diligence and you're going to write in there that the buyer gets the earnest money back, I guarantee you seller's not going to sign it, right? Like that's just not going to happen. And so, is what it is. Now, if the seller signs it, does the buyer get the earnest money back? Yes, because they've agreed to. So you have to think of these as two separate forms. If I unilaterally terminate, it doesn't matter if it's a valid reason or not. Contract is terminated. Okay? Now, this is the only place where that really causes an issue is if the seller tries to terminate. Because think about it, the seller doesn't really have the right to terminate under very much in the contract. And so a seller sending a unilateral notice to terminate doesn't really carry the same weight. Whereas the buyer, by terminating, is saying, I'm not coming to closing and I'm not giving you any money, right? Like that's the statement the buyer is saying. The seller could theoretically try and do that, and I guess it would technically terminate the contract. The problem is they'd be in for a pretty bad lawsuit of specific performance because the contract says they're not allowed to do that. So just as a general rule. Typically, buyers are allowed to walk, sellers are not. So important to understand the difference between the mutual, which is always preferred, and the unilateral. So think about those. Any questions about terminations? So what happens if you've terminated the contract because due diligence was ending and it's 11:50 and you're like, I am not getting this signed. I am terminating the contract. So we terminate the contract. Sellers come back the next day and say, oh my God, we didn't see your email yesterday. We had something, blah, blah, blah. We are very happy to sign that amendment and do what you ask. We'd like to go forward with closing. Can you just have them sign the amendment and move forward to closing? No, because the contract's dead, right? Like that's not a thing. So we have to use, well, my reinstatement didn't populate. All right, so you'll have to trust me that it's on here. There's a reinstatement form, and the reinstatement form is the only way that you can reinstate a contract. You cannot do an amendment to a dead contract, okay? That's the piece that's super, super important for you to understand. You cannot amend a dead contract. I'm going to say it one more time. You cannot amend a dead contract. Okay? I see people try to do that. I'm going to do an amendment and it's going to, all parties agree that the contract's back and alive. No, we need more language than that. And I apologize for not having it on the screen, but you can go look at it, homework. The reinstatement form is going to clearly state that this contract is being reinstated from a moment of death. We're bringing it back to life. And here are the things that are going to change in it. So, amendment to address concerns was not signed. I don't remember the number of the form, John, sorry. But it's, if you type reinstatement, you can find it in your forms thing very easy. And so it's this amendment to, or not amendment, this reinstatement form. If your amendment to address concerns was not signed, when you do a reinstatement, you need to add the things from the amendment to address concerns that everybody agrees to the reinstatement. Because if you just reinstate the contract and your due diligence time frame isn't changed, you don't modify that in your reinstatement, is the buyer's earnest money at risk? Yeah, in fact, it's gone because the earnest money, I mean, the due diligence is over, the amendment wasn't signed, and you're right back where you didn't want to be. So you want to make sure in the reinstatement, a reinstatement is similar to a counterform. You can change anything in the contract you want. You fill out the form, put all the information on there, everybody signs it, and now you're back in business with a live contract and moving forward with all the terms that everybody agrees to. Questions about that?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Dan.
If a client, not an agent, wants to play poker, because you said before, you can't threaten to, withdraw or whatever.
Right.
Is there a strategy? Are you better off to break up and then make up, or are you better off to send a mutual termination and then leverage it with something else as the clock is running?
That
Or is
is a
that too
really
hypothetical?
interesting question. I I think it depends on the situation. It depends on who your clients are, who the other side is, what your client's willing to risk. If you got this house in a multiple offer situation as a buyer, um, and you play Russian roulette with sending a termination and trying to reinstate because you think that everybody's going to get together on it, um, that's risky, right? Like that's a potential issue. So that's where I would just be aware that if you terminate, you could be done, right? Like you could maybe not be able to get it back because we all know that real estate's an emotional thing, right? And so if you as the buyer terminate because you're trying to strong arm the seller, well, the seller might just say, fine, I'll go deal with somebody else. If I got to start over, I'm gonna start over with somebody else. Now, if you're the listing agent, that is not necessarily the best path, right? Like having a contract and getting it to close once you've gotten started down that path is typically better for your seller than trying to start over, but not always. And so, you have to look at the exact situation and just make a determination from, okay, client, here's the situation. If we do this, this is what could happen. If we do this, this is what could happen. And if we do this, this is what could happen. What do you want to do? And when they say, well, what would you do? Well, it's not my house. It's not my risk, right? Like, I get it. I won't get paid if this doesn't close, but that's probably less dangerous than you not being able to sell your house and maybe having to be on the market for 6 more months and maybe, like just all the different possibilities of what might happen there. Does
Well,
that answer
I
your
brought it
question?
up because I've had more than my share of attorneys as my clients.
Yeah.
So they play a different game in the
Now
courtroom.
attorney clients will push the envelope a whole different way than normal people from a standpoint from that. Kimberly, what you got?
I was just wondering, why would you reinstate a contract if it's already dead and say there's something got missed? Wouldn't you just maybe start a clean new offer?
So that is a excellent question, and I'm glad that you ask it because the tendency is to think, okay, well, if I have to, like, if we want to get back under contract, let's just do a new contract and start over, right? So let's say, for example, your termination was due to financing. So you terminated during finance contingency, and now all of a sudden your lender or Aunt Gertrude or whatever is fixing the day, and so now you can come back and buy the house. If I write a contract from scratch, clean copy of the original contract, what date do I put on it? Do I put today's date on it?
I would. I'd
Yeah.
start for
So I'm going to start from today, right? And then how many days due diligence do I put in there?
7 to 10.
Okay. So if I put 7 to 10 due diligence days in there, as the seller, if I sign that, what's happened? All of a sudden, the buyer has an out again. They've got another due diligence period. We've already been through that. We've already negotiated that. We've already been down that road. And now all of a sudden, you want to do it again. So effectively, for a seller, if you write a contract from scratch, you're effectively a new buyer. So why wouldn't they just go out and see if they could get a better offer if they, especially if they had multiple offers, why wouldn't they get another offer from somebody else? Whereas if I reinstate the offer, I'm basically just undoing the knot of termination and only modifying things that were the issue with moving forward with the contract, like financing. And maybe if my financing contingency now, oh, wait, I'm good to go. I don't need to extend that financing contingency or anything.
Mhm.
I can just reinstate the contract and literally not change anything in it. And I'm going to be able to close on the same closing date and everything just the way it was. So just from a simplicity standpoint, um, it's almost like instead of using a counter form, doing an entire new offer every time, except for it just varies very greatly depending on where you are in the process of being under contract. Because you might have terminated, maybe the FHA underwriter did some weird valuation thing and you had to terminate like the day before closing because FHA said the valuation wasn't right and you can't close the FHA loan. But Aunt Gertrude, which I don't know why I'm using Aunt Gertrude, but whatever. Aunt Gertrude's going to come in. Ryan has an Aunt Gertrude, I'm pretty sure. And Aunt Gertrude's
Nate
going to come
Richard.
in. You do? Oh, that's funny. So Aunt Gertrude comes through and is just going to help you out because, she feels bad that you couldn't get the loan. So she's going to lend you the money and let you buy the house. And now, lo and behold, you close the next day and everything's fine. So, there's all kinds of weird situations like that. I don't have an Aunt Gertrude that's going to come bail me out, unfortunately. You just never know what might happen when you're pressed with the, oh crap, I can't close. Like, what am I going to do? Or the seller might say, hey, I'll do some owner financing or I'll do, like there's options here. Like I want this house to close. So, there's lots of things that we can do with that standpoint. And yes, John, if you need help going through these and you're processing a weird situation like that, call your broker. For us, we have the broker helpline. You can call us directly, whichever. And that's what we're here for. So, any questions about the contracts and things? Nothing? All right. All right. Well, we will call it done for today. Nice, quick, and easy one. See, I told you we were
Wow.
going to be happy, sad, and then happy again. And then, that's where we went. So I'm going to give you a few minutes back and let you go out there and do some work. Thank you guys for
That's a good
coming.
idea. Thanks, Brett.